right, it's recording. All right, so hey everyone, welcome. I'm Verz, as you already know, and I'm with Justin Murphy. This is a fun episode because I actually get to have Justin's face on the camera since everyone else is a non these days. So welcome.
What's up, man? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I guess we'll start with your book, Based Deleuze, which I really enjoyed. And I say that in like a positive tone, but it's often with like books of like philosophy, it's very dense, and I actually feel like anyone can kind of pick it up, which is impressive considering the subject matter.
Thanks, man. I'm really glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. So let's start off with so who are you, and so like the audience kind of can have an idea of like what you do.
Yeah, sure. My name's Justin Murphy. I'm a political scientist by training. I was a professor for several years, and then, make a long story short, I just, started getting into some conflicts with my employer, and I decided that I was better off just going totally independent, doing all my intellectual work full-time on the internet, and I left academia. And that was about almost a year ago, not quite a year ago. So yeah, I took a major pay cut, but I was very confident in the different creative intellectual projects and trajectories that I was seeing unfold in my creative work on the internet. And I decided to just, take a gamble and go all in on it. And as I come up on almost a year later, I still have a couple months left until it's the year mark. I'm pretty pleased with the results, honestly. I mean, I'm almost fully replaced my income, almost.
Oh, nice.
Not quite there yet, but I've had to hustle. I've had to do a bunch of different little things, The book actually did fairly well, I think, financially, but just as one little book, it's not going to make that much money, of course. I think it made quite good numbers for what it was, but I've had to hustle a bunch of other things. I've been doing some freelance stuff. I also have a little startup thing called indiethinkers.org, and basically everything is growing well enough at this point now that I also just did an online course. I did my first serious online course.
Deleuze. I saw that on YouTube.
Yeah. So basically, that's, make a long story short, I've just been hustling on just doing different creative, independent, intellectual work since leaving academia, and it took a lot of hustle, took a lot of grind, but everything seems to be doing well, and my income is slowly growing back up to what it was. And what's cool now is that the sky's the limit. So in a year from now, maybe I'll be making 3 times as much as I would have been as an academic, being even totally way more free and completely independent in my creative intellectual work. So I'm very pumped. I think everything's pretty much going as planned.
Very cool. And it adds like a nice, what I like about your work, I guess, is that even though you're, I guess, like a self-identified leftist, right?
Sure. More or less. I mean, I have some somewhat conservative dimensions of me, but on the whole, sociologically, you'd have to call me a leftist, I think.
Yeah. But even so, you kind of still interact fairly actively with a lot of the right-wing reactionary Twitter, which is nice because it gives a breath of fresh air. My voice is gonna go in and out. It gives you gives a breath of fresh air in that it's not the same meme of why I love BAP or whatever. It's not the same right-wing bodybuilder groiper meme. So it gives a nice perspective that I think my audience needs to see as well.
Okay, right on.
So let's start with your book. So why did you say sociologically left? Well, as opposed
to by that I just mean all of my adult life since coming of age, I've hung out with leftists, been mostly interested in stuff that is associated with leftism, kind of weird collaborative, communal housing and stuff like that. And I'm generally I have a left-wing temperament in that. I'm personally not bothered by gay people or trans people or people of different races. I'm pretty cool with most people. So that's a kind of liberal or leftist temperament or personality trait, right? Some people actually only really like people that are like them, and they get irritated or even disgusted by others, foreigners, or whatever. I just temperamentally, I'm not.
So you have a high openness trait.
Yeah. I've always been cool with hanging out with the weirdest, wackiest, sometimes fucked up people or whatever. So I'm not. This isn't virtue signaling. I'm just saying people with different temperaments some people genuinely, they think about like America's borders, and they think about like Mexican people coming up through the southern border, and that makes them upset. It makes them angry, and that's fine. I think that's one fairly reasonable and natural way for a human temperament to respond to the issue of borders. But I'm a leftist in temperament, in that shit just doesn't upset me. I don't feel any, like, I don't really mind it, like, about that kind of stuff. So that's what that's what I mean by sociologically and psychologically. I'm generally a kind of left person.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, like, I also my following knows too. Like, I grew up in New York City, so like I'm not particularly like by birth. I'm fairly cosmopolitan, and my family is super cosmopolitan. But I also lived in North Carolina for a while, so like I have insight into, and my stepfather was a minister, so I have insight into both worlds. So I kind of see the value from both sides that I don't feel like a lot of the left really can see, because they just never experienced it, or rejecting it like on an emotional level.
Right on.
Cool. So yeah, so that kind of brings me to like your book. There was like a couple cool things about like in your reading of Deleuze, that's like trying to giving him like a based energy, which I actually think you made a fairly strong argument. Like there was a moment of like the Antinomianism versus the pronomianism thing, which is like, I don't know, you probably can describe it better, but like I thought that was a very interesting basis for the defense. So like, can you like go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I actually picked that up from Moldbug, who your audience may or may not know. Curtis Yarvin, pretty infamous blogger from a few years back, but really smart dude, really interesting guy with I think some quite useful and stimulating ideas. He kind of planted this seed in my mind a few years back, this distinction between antinomianism and pronomianism. And at its core, all these words really refer to as one's attitude towards names and words, and the relationship between names and words on the one hand, and things and relationships on the other. And so the pronomian attitude is one in which words and names and labels have to be enforced, and the rigor with which names and labels are associated with things in the world is a matter of utmost importance, and one has to be very severe about that. My other interlocutor, DC Miller, who was on my podcast a few months back, I think has a very nice way of putting this when he says that conservatism, in that podcast with me, he says conservatism is the rectification of names. I think he actually might be borrowing that from Confucius, if I recall correctly, or someone. I'm remembering that correctly, but he says conservatism is the rectification of names. That is a quintessential representation of pronomianism.
Okay.
So that names matter, right? So think about the debates about gender and trans and all of that. Conservatives are inclined to become very upset when someone that they see as a man is labeling themselves as a woman. This is, for the conservative, for the pronomian, this is a major problem. And so that's a certain attitude towards names or labels. Hence, the nomos in nomian. And the antinomian is inclined to see names and labels as arbitrary, contingent, and generally, based on a history of injustice and contingency. That doesn't really matter, right? So another way to think about this would be through the lens of contracts. So contracts, the anti-capitalist, who's generally associated with a kind of antinomian attitude, might say, what is student debt? It's just pieces of paper, right? We can just erase student debt because it's literally just digits on a ledger somewhere, and there's no real reality to it. We can just totally overwrite it if we want to. That's a kind of antinomian attitude. Or in the trans case, for instance, a man can call himself a woman and he's a woman, and these are just arbitrary labels, right? So that's the antinomian attitude. And what I argue in Based Deleuze is that Deleuze, I think, is trying to build for us a kind of pronomian leftism. And that, I think, is very much my own political orientation as well. In other words, one can affirm many of the ideas that are associated with leftism, for instance, maybe a strong egalitarianism, a strong openness to other races and genders or what have you. One can affirm certain aspects of leftism, but then also say that names matter and that names need to be rectified. And I think that that is what Deleuze is actually doing. And I give some kind of concrete examples because he was very interested in contracts, for instance. Mm-hmm. He wasn't interested in, everything can be overwritten and it doesn't matter. Names are just arbitrary. What he actually wanted to do, and this is a kind of current that I have articulated and developed somewhat myself in my own writings, is trying to figure out how leftists can actually impose on themselves increasingly rigorous pronomian structures. Mm-hmm. So to me, and I think also to Deleuze, the problem with contracts and a rigorous enforcement of norms and names is not that it's intrinsically unjust or oppressive for there to be a rigorous order of names. No, rather what actually ends up happening under a kind of mega capitalist civilization such as ours today, a kind of complex global capitalist society as we live in the West today, is that in fact names are distributed and enforced in a variety of weird ways that actually we have no say over, and that actually by elites can be manipulated in ingenuous ways. And so there is a kind of tendency to reject the order of names as oppressive, when in fact what's really the problem is that that order of names is being manipulated disingenuously by elites. And so leftists get tricked or baited into rejecting the order of names altogether. Like it's all baloney, it's all arbitrary. Whereas what they really should be saying, I think following Deleuze and following my own work also in a kind of post-Deleuzian line, is that the order of names should be rectified, but we should do it autonomously for ourselves, on ourselves, in healthy communities, probably small, like radically creative, honest communities. And from that basis, if one is able to enforce the order of names or rectify the order of names on oneself, that is actually the most viable and practical path to a viable kind of working radical left community or communism, or call it what you want. And that's something that I really think is a very promising path for research and experimentation. I think Deleuze was on that path. I'm on that path. And it's essentially a kind of paradoxical, like conservative radical leftism though.
Yeah. It brings to like mind like that whole thing, like I think Nassim Taleb said about like being communist on like a very small local scale as opposed to like on the larger scale. You kind of like take yeah. That's cool. Yeah, no, there's that notion about like the names, as well as like you also mentioned like the Sadism, Masochism like line, which I thought was also really cool. And then in that whole section kind of like tied into Bitcoin, which I thought was great because I started with crypto Twitter. So how you were talking about how like how Bitcoin uses like smart, or crypto in general uses smart contracts and like the blockchain or whatever as a way to push that like decentralized like whatever. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. I'm having a hard time thinking. Yeah, so I thought that was a really cool way that you kind of tied it all together, and I also didn't really expect a lot of Bitcoin talk in it, so it was a nice little surprise.
Thanks.
So how does sadism and masochism play into this schema here?
Well, I don't think that plays in too directly to any type of kind of concrete political discussion. I think it was a sort of interesting tangent that I explored in the book, because Deleuze was very interested in masochism as a kind of psychological formation. And he does say some rather interesting and intriguing things about the difference between sadism and masochism. You know, there's this idea that they are opposite ends of a continuum, and he basically says that's not right. He thinks that they're just fundamentally different, and they're not really opposed. They're just distinct, separate formations. And but in this connection, he does kind of see masochism as the kind of pronomian, I think, attitude in which, you know, one is, well, he basically he says a bunch of rather interesting things about this, and so I explore that in the book. But it's not because I think sadism and masochism are particularly interesting political pathways or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think so. I think it's more just that he was interested in these psychological formations, and to the degree that he analyzes them, he comes down pretty clearly on the side of masochism, which he associates with a kind of pronomian contract attitude,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because
Yeah, yeah.
the masochist develops a contract essentially with the dominatrix or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's pretty clear that he thinks that's a kind of he's more favorable towards that idea, whereas he says the sadists, he basically puts in one camp sadism and kind of like the crazier, violent left-wing revolutionaries,
Mm-hmm.
like the French revolutionaries, for instance. So he basically sees kind of pathological, oppressive, like fascist leftism and like
Yeah.
murderous, violent kind
Yeah,
of leftist
authoritarian.
tendencies. He sees that as on the side with sadism, and whereas the small community that uses contracts, perhaps Bitcoin and smart contracts or what have you, to essentially create somewhat severe, somewhat authoritarian, somewhat violent, even possibly structures, but does it on themselves
Mm-hmm.
autonomously. He sees that as on the side of freedom, on the side of liberation, I think, and I think it's pretty clear that that's the direction he's going. That's essentially what he's suggesting, and so that was the point of that in the book, to basically bring in his discussion of sadism and masochism into this larger point that I'm making. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is like you were kind of called it like a small tangent, but I actually was like that was part of one of the few things that kind of like reverberated heavily. We also both
Oh,
talked to Alexander Bard, and Alexander Bard has a whole like effectively a book on like how sadism and masochism plays into like power online.
okay.
Uh, but cool. So then you have like so you continue to talk about how like Deleuze is based, which and towards the I don't know, I guess towards the end there, you kind of like talk about like Deleuze and like with his like race realism and his ideas on just general like human biodiversity, which I thought was also, which I did see in Deleuze, like he's fairly like obvious about that, but it is interesting to see you like actually flesh that out.
Yeah.
So like what do you have any thoughts on that for the audience here?
Well, I do just think it's rather extraordinary because Deleuze is so popular right now. He's very hot in kind of
Yeah.
lefty academic circles. He's very fashionable, and yet also, as we all know, right now there's a lot of political correctness around race and gender, and it's just kind of funny when you actually go through his books and you see the kinds of things that he and his collaborator Guattari say. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
extremely non-PC, and he does seem to actually pretty explicitly affirm uh, the existence of relatively hard differences
Mm-hmm.
in qualities and abilities across people, possibly even across races. He seems to pretty much affirm that, as far as I could tell. And I just thought it was kind of irresistibly funny to pull those quotes out and arrange them and show people that, because I mean, I don't think he was racist at all. Like, I don't think he cared at all about,
Mm-hmm.
any type of like, he certainly wasn't any kind of like, he had no like white consciousness or anything like that. He wasn't interested in anything like that. But it was kind of just an irresistible opportunity to point out that by all indications, he pretty much does think what is today called kind of like the HBD perspective, which is persona non grata in academia. Like you cannot be in academia and affirm any of those things today
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever. I mean, it's pretty absolute prohibition that all of those ideas are completely and pretty fully stigmatized, so that if you pretty much say anything in favor of them, you are persona non grata, and there will be serious problems for you. So it's just kind of, I don't know, I just saw it as an irresistible thing to point out in the book that this kind of treasured figure of the radical academic left is also a pretty explicit supporter of ideas that are also by the academic lefty groups seen as absolutely unacceptable. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I just thought it was kind of funny that that's a fact that's just kind of sitting out there and no one really talks about it. So
I think it's because most people just didn't read the book. They kind of like spark noted it for grad school or something. That's becoming my like major theory for life is that like people just never read the book that half the books that they're talking about.
Oh, that's certainly true. I mean, in academia, you learn very quickly that you have to learn how to talk about things you've never read. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even I mean, I've done enough like collaborative papers with people and stuff. I know how academics work, and because I was one, and I knew them and worked with many of them. And um, people, if you get them privately, like people were pretty honest about
Yeah.
when you write a paper, when you write like an academic article, you know, you might cite like 70 papers. You definitely didn't read all of them. I mean, it's a fact. And, you know,
No time.
a reviewer will tell you, you didn't cite Johnny Smith 2011. So then you just go get the paper Johnny Smith 2011 and you just put it in the fucking bibliography. Maybe look at the abstract, right? But no, I think it's just a basic open secret that most like professional intellectuals don't read half of the stuff that they cite, for sure.
Yeah. So then how, like, what's the story behind how you kind of ended up writing this book? Because, I mean, it is, I guess, on some level a political book, but if you're kind of a political, I wouldn't say it's directly political.
Yeah, the story behind writing the book, I guess a few different factors went into it. One, I've always been interested in Deleuze. I do honestly think that he's a really pretty brilliant, fascinating thinker with just a very intriguing and stimulating body of work. And that's part of it. I mean, I'll shoot straight with you in that it was also somewhat strategic because I decided to leave academia and I needed to design some experiments. I needed to carve out some projects that I could do relatively quickly that I thought would be, you know, have an impact. And so I started with pretty much a consideration of like, what am I really interested in? What would I really like to do? And so Deleuze kind of fits that criteria because I think he's really smart and interesting and cool. So that's very genuine and sincere. But also I had to think, what could I do relatively quickly? So that basically meant it had to be something that I already read a lot on. You know, I wasn't going to like start doing original new reading or research on something that would take like a year to do because that just wouldn't work for what I was trying to do in that moment, what I needed to do in that moment. So I had to think of someone or something, some idea for a book that I pretty much already have done enough reading for. So again, Deleuze kind of checks that box because I read a lot of Deleuze like as a grad student and even recently. Even as an academic, I did not publish that many peer-reviewed philosophy articles, but the one like good academic philosophy article that I published in a peer-reviewed journal and in a kind of hip, fashionable lefty like critical theory journal actually. The journal is called Parisia. I published an article in there on Deleuze and Foucault. So then it was also the strategic consideration like, okay, I have a little bit of academic credibility on this particular topic, so that would be good to leverage. And then finally the other consideration was just that Deleuze is kind of zeitgeisty. People are really into him. He's very fashionable right now, both in academia but also on the internet. Like people like to talk about him. People think he's cool, and I don't think half of those people really know anything about him. Honestly, I think like there's just a lot of people on the internet who like to LARP as like Deleuzians, and a lot of these people are like kids or like they're just not. They don't really know and whatever.
He has good lingo.
Yeah, and so it just seemed like all the stars were aligned. I was like, I should write a short, punchy, relatively quick, small book about Deleuze, and I'll just try to basically focus on those parts of his work that I think are most badly misunderstood or neglected by academics, probably because of essentially political reasons, political pressures. And since I'm totally independent now, I'll just go as hard as I can on precisely what you're not really allowed to talk about with Deleuze. And I'll just go all in on that. I'll write a short little book. I can do it quickly. It'll be fun. I believe in it. And it'll probably be splashy because a lot of people are interested in it right now. And so that was the thought process.
Nice. Personally, I think that like the short book is just going to be the standard. I just don't see how with the like how much information there is. Like far too inundated. So like we have like I just think books in general need to be shorter, and
I
I
think
don't know.
so
I think
too. I think you're going to see more short books too. I definitely still, I'm enough of a traditional intellectual that I still have, I'm definitely going to be doing some long books for sure. I definitely I have some already underway. I have at least one book that's almost pretty much done. That is, I originally wrote it for intending it to be a kind of academic slash kind of critical theory type of book. And so that'll be like a proper kind of more sophisticated book of about 250 pages. It's almost done. And I want to do more and more. I definitely want to do a handful of like that over the course of my life. But I agree with you that I think short, punchy books are going to be hotter and hotter. I think people want to read something in a weekend. I think that's really attractive. It's just fun, right? It's the fact of the matter is, like, people are overworked, people are stressed, and attention spans are being decimated by the internet. And whether you like that or not, it seems to be a fact. And people want philosophy. People want to read philosophy. They want to read interesting, difficult, challenging theoretical and philosophical ideas. They just don't want to spend 6 months on it. And they want it to be, they would like to sit down, in a weekend and read something like really interesting and stimulating that they can get through and walk away with something. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think especially if you're a creative intellectual, it's kind of a cool thing. I think it's pretty cool, honestly, because it's also easier to write. Obviously, it's more fun and more dynamic. So I'm all for it.
And a lot of the previous page counts had to do with like physical printing of the books to make it like profitable, and also like to have the spine. And if you don't
That's
have
true. That's a good point. Yeah.
There's no reason to even do it. So you're kind of branching off on your own, obviously, but like still trying to maintain like the intellectual thing. What do you think is going to happen to like the academy? And that's like been a question in my mind. Like everyone knows the university system is like inflated prices and the degree's been kind of like inflated. So what do you think is going to be the case with the internet? Like, how do we have some level of intellectual credibility while also, getting away from the physical institution?
Right. Well, honestly, I think the problem of intellectual credibility is not as hard as people think it is. I think you should separate the problem of accreditation and intellectual credibility. Those are two different things. And what they call the accreditation problem is for employers who are hiring young people coming out of high school. So that's the real problem that universities solve right now. They basically are a super expensive and wasteful sorting mechanism that will put a stamp of approval on certain people coming out of high school because getting a degree from a good university shows that you can, do your work, that you're at least reasonably intelligent, and you can follow through on deadlines and stuff like that. So accredited universities giving degrees to young people serves, that solves a real kind of economic problem. And right, so that's essentially, the signaling theory of education. People going to college are essentially just wanting to gain a costly signal of their quality, and that will help them get jobs. So the university does that, that's fine, whatever. But intellectual credibility is something different. So the need for young people to get a degree as a costly signal to prove their own quality, that's something very different and should not be conflated with the goals of intellectual, like professional, mature thinkers and writers and creators who want credibility. I think your question is really good, though, because you kind of did conflate them, and I think many people do. So it's an instructive question. I think, honestly, the intellectual credibility is pretty good at showing itself. I really do think a smart person can pick up a book and know pretty quickly if this person is trustworthy or interesting or valuable to them. I think the kind of networked collective intelligence is pretty damn good, actually, at sorting the wheat from the chaff. And so I think if you're interested in doing serious intellectual work, like writing books or whatever, I actually think that the perception problem or the credibility problem for someone who's self-publishing, let's say, is getting weaker and weaker every passing day. One, because people are getting better at judging quality for themselves. That's part of it. And that's part of that's something we've kind of learned through the internet, right? Because anyone who's any active media consumer on the internet has become a pro at sorting through what they like and what they don't like,
Mm-hmm.
and or what they think is valuable or what they don't think is valuable. So I think that's just gonna keep increasing. People are gonna be more and more confident in themselves as the judges of quality and what they want and what they don't want. That seems to be a clear empirical trend, and I think it's going to keep increasing. But the other really important variable here is that the credibility of mainstream institutional intellectuals is decreasing rapidly. And this is something people don't think enough about.
Mm-hmm.
Like, especially for people who are conservatives, or in America in the Republican Party, having a PhD from a fancy university or being a professor at a fancy university actually decreases your credibility in
Mm-hmm.
the eyes of a lot of people, and so that's a game changer. People don't realize how much of a game changer that is, dude. I mean, I felt this I mean, obviously one of the main reasons to become a professor, if you want to do a professional intellectual life and have a successful, impactful, and meaningful long-term intellect, you want to
Yeah.
have discoveries, and you want to produce meaningful work that advances intellectual history. Like, if that's what you want to do, one of the things you'll learn if you go through academia today is it was pretty astounding, man, like how little my academic credentials really got me in terms of public people caring about what I think. you
Mm-hmm.
know you kind of have this mental model for people who are like trying to gain credibility by going through academia. You have this mental model where it's like, oh, once I get my PhD and then I'm a professor, like anything I say, people are just going to be so respectful of it. People are going to, really care about it and trust it. And it's just not, it's not the case. You can put in 10 years of your life paying your dues and getting credentials as an academic and becoming a professor. And it's pretty amazing. Nowadays, people don't really care that much, or at least they care much less than you might think.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this with some experience. Like, honestly, leaving academia got me so much more credibility in the public perception than being an academic. And I kid you not. I kid you not. And you know why? Because so many people go into academia just because they want a cushy job, and they're not
Yeah.
really that smart. They're not really honest people, and they do work that's pretty much just this like bureaucratic crap that is somewhere vaguely between lying and wrong and just boring and useless on the other end. And when that you play that out over time, over enough years, then the public starts to realize, and being a professor is no longer a credible signal of anything. In fact, it becomes a signal that you are very likely a bullshitter. I mean, I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really how people see it. Whereas what people don't realize, on the other hand, is when you have a career and you encounter a lot of bullshit in that career, and you see under the hood that there's a lot of rot, there's a lot rotten here, and you make some type of stand where you basically just say, you know what, I don't feel like doing this anymore. I'm not going along with it. And I'm just simply going to say honestly and publicly what I'm observing. And if it means I get fired, then I get fired. If it means I'm going to quit, then it means I'm going to quit. In that moment, you actually are sending a credible signal to the public
Mm-hmm.
that you're willing to take your licks. You're willing to be honest, even if you get punished, even if you lose income, even if you take a huge pay cut, even if you lose, career security and status. And I think what happens nowadays is, by quitting academia, I can actually get way more public credibility than by staying in academia. I really do think that genuinely is what happened to me, because when I left academia, way more people were suddenly really interested in what I was saying and what I was doing, because you can trust it. You can trust it when
That's
someone
one,
makes
yeah.
that kind of costly break from the status quo. And I think that I'm really interested in kind of open sourcing that logic. I think people don't realize, people overestimate how much credibility they're going to get by going into academia, and they underestimate how much credibility they can gain just by fucking being real all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're not doing the secret handshake and you're willing to like actually experience, for better lack of better word, market forces, then it demonstrates that you have something of value to say at the very least, or authenticity at the very least, which is
Yeah,
what wins.
that's right.
Awesome. Uh, cool. To ask you, like, I guess, like, I don't know how personal this is. Like, are you okay? Are you like? I've heard like my friend. I don't know. Some people follow you into like your trad cat. You like identify like a trad cat, left cat. How does that work?
Yeah, I'm left Catholic, you could say.
What is
I think that adequately describes me. I'm a bit trad, but I mean not super trad.
yeah?
To me, all that means is, yeah, I'm a Catholic. I'm a Catholic man. I mean, I'm not a particularly good Catholic or Christian. I've
Okay,
never really pretended to be, like, I'm no theologian. I've never pretended to be particularly sophisticated or devout. You know, I'm
mm-hmm.
a very imperfect man, and I do most of the sinful, stupid things that like most modern people do. You know, so I'm definitely not repping myself as some kind of, you know, like admirable Christian or anything like that. But I'm a Catholic. I do believe, and I do think I do think that the Christian picture of the world is essentially the truest and most beautiful that is available to us that I have known, and I do think that some amount of faith is essentially required in any type of intellectual uh, wrestling with the world. You're just never going to get a fully rationally closed
Mm-hmm.
system, and so whatever you think or believe about the world and life and yourself, there are going to be elements of faith whether you like it or not. And my
Mm-hmm.
attitude is it's better to own that and confront that explicitly, and that's essentially what it means to be religious, than to try to ignore that or act like it doesn't exist, which then I think produces these like crazy pathological political formations like we're seeing today, which are essentially kind of faith-based systems by people who are absolutely insistent that they are atheists and don't believe in God and don't have faith. So yeah, that's pretty much my 2 cents on religion. And I guess I'm left Catholic in the sense that, I mean, I do. This goes back to what I was saying before about why I'm, you know, my center of gravity, if you had to summarize it, would essentially be more left than right, is because
Mm-hmm.
I do think that we do have very strong obligations to look after each other and to provide for each other. Now, I understand economics, and I think if you're smart and you understand economics, you pretty much have to be a libertarian on economics, and I am for the most part. Like I don't have like stupid ideas about the ability for huge bureaucratic national governments to like solve problems. I think no, they're generally pretty bad at any type of large problem solving, and so I'm very fully realistic on all of that stuff, and I'm economically libertarian in a basic sense. But I do think that it doesn't change the ethical obligation, which is essentially a kind of ultimate. It's apart from what is economically possible.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a kind of core underlying obligation to each other, and that is essentially to me the communist imperative. Like I actually do really think that every person is really urgently obligated to figure out how they can take care of every other person, even though that's kind of insanely impossible and difficult. That is what I think kind of our moral or ethical calling is, as humans, and it's vexing and it's crazy, and that's a very challenging, weird thing, right? Like, how do we do that? I don't know. That's a practical question which we can debate, but I do affirm a kind of essential obligation to look after each other, and that is what I mean when I sometimes somewhat playfully, you know, call myself a communist. I do think we're ethically obligated to essentially provide for each other in that kind of radical and urgent way. I think the puzzle is just figuring out how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think you can affirm kind of the reality of libertarian economics, you know, that markets are real, that those forces are ineluctable, and that we have to be honest about that. But then also still say, how can we nonetheless create novel structures where people are looked after? And that's pretty much where I'm at. And that goes back to the stuff about Deleuze and contracts and pronomian leftism. I do think that there's still underexplored subspaces in the parameter space. You know, I think there are combinations of statecraft and community building that have not been fully exploited, have not been fully explored, and that's why I'm interested in things like. That's why I'm interested in all these crazy ideas about, you know, neo-monarchism and
Mm-hmm.
neo-cameralism and patchwork and, you know, communism and blockchains. And like to me, what all of this represents, and this is why I'm interested in the radical left as much as the radical right, is it's all about exploring that the entire parameter space, right? That the entire solution space, which we've not even come anywhere close to exhausting. And so that's where I'm putting my energy and that's where I'm placing my bets, is on this kind of radical, weird, fringe possibilities and combinations that have not really been explored yet.
Hey, I'm with you on that. I would say like a lot of that, like the more egalitarian energy, I guess, kind of aligns with like the abstraction of like the Christian ethos, as opposed to like the, I don't know, like the reality of the institution of Catholicism or what have you. Like, do you, a lot of like, I guess the crypto Twitter, right wing Twitter, all those reactionary people that kind of I interact with, it's their issues less the community space and more like the fact that there's like a ignoring of the, like, I guess the harshness of reality and trying to create this like, I guess like soy, I guess they would use, or like a nerfed version of reality to like, you know, adhere to everyone and make sure everyone's like safe. Like, what is, like, how do you respond to like something like that, to the notion that like, you know, you're nerfing reality?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying, is that the real revolutionary left community will not be nerfing anything, but in fact, quite the opposite. And this is like what I've proposed in. I wrote a fairly controversial essay at one point on what I called neo-feudal technocommunism, and that's essentially what I was arguing, is that for there to be a viable revolutionary left community, or a functioning communism, in other words, it's only really possible if the group voluntarily affirms and kind of welcomes and enforces a particularly austere type of kind of accounting of ethics. So really, it's like, I think the revolutionary community will be founded on the exact opposite of nerfing, a kind of aggressive, purposeful, going in the opposite direction of nerfing, basically making ourselves harder, but harder in the sense of accountable to reality. All I mean is accountable. So in that essay, for instance, I sketched this possible like thought experiment of, you know, if you want to build communism, get a bunch of people with different skills and traits. Some are smart, some are dumb, some are white, some are black, doesn't matter. Widest diversity possible. And as long as there are some productive people, then you can, in principle, you should be able to arrange a series of measurement devices and smart contracts in which good behavior is required by the less productive people, and the more productive people simply have to give a good chunk of their income to the group. And so the thought experiment there is that pretty much, if you're like a economically struggling or poor working class person and you want communism, well, here's how you get it. You make credible promises to rich people who make way more money than you. You make credible promises and you create institutions and devices, like actual technologies, that can credibly commit to the rich people that you're going to be well behaved, right? And you don't necessarily need to make money. Like the wager there is that rich people who make a lot of money, who are very productive, much more so than other people, would quite like to have a community where they're valued, respected, appreciated, admired for their hard work. And if that means they have to give a lot of money to the less productive people, but what they get in return is a community where the poor people, the working class people, actually like them and get along well with them, and everyone gets everyone gets along well in a healthy, harmonious community. Like I believe that it's psychologically plausible and sociologically plausible. It's like an empirically realistic model that the productive, smart people would want to give a lot of their income to support that harmonious community where they're admired and appreciated for their hard work and for their generosity, really. And a community in which the poor people, the working class people who are supported by the rich people, actually do have to be decent people. And if they're not decent people, then they lose out of the communist circle, right? So this is like one of my big ideas. Honestly, people think I'm kidding when I talk about it, but it's super legit and plausible, I think.
Isn't that like that's like the original tribe though? It's the, it's like actually
Right.
fairly based in our actual biology, and then throw in like the technology to force people to actually follow through.
Yeah, exactly. So I painted this kind of vision of how you could do this with basically Internet of Things technologies, like fill your commune up with sensor devices, right, that are all passive, so it doesn't require a lot of work, and then hook those up to the blockchain essentially. And so like, if you're lying to someone, right, your words are going to be detected by an audio sensor. The smart contracts are going to be comparing your words to like some source of truth, like Wikipedia or something like that, right? And if the classifier designates your statement as likely to be a lie with like greater than 95% probability, then the smart contract automatically, makes you not get money that month or whatever,
Yeah.
So like you can imagine basically developing a viable real communist system in this way, and all the source code can be open and voluntary. That is what I think is really cool about this, is you can negotiate the parameters. You get a bunch of people together and you can decide what is the code of ethics that people have to follow to receive their share of the communist pot, if you will. And to me, like, this makes perfect sense, and I think it's actually really exciting. Like, if you really believe in communism and you really think it's necessary for humans to create organizations and communities and polities in which everyone is provided for economically by the fruits of the people who are most productive and most rich, then what I'm describing should be really exciting. I think it actually could work. I think people should be like working on this. But whenever I talk about this to actual leftists, they all find it horrifying and terrible. And then that makes me realize that it's the accountability that they don't like.
Yes,
and that is ultimately why I think communism always fails, is because people want a system where they get what they want, but they're not ever going to really be held accountable to others. So in other words, what I've discovered in this process of thinking this through and also sharing it with people and kind of understanding their response to it or reading their response to it is that there is actually a viable model for communism that is kind of game theoretically stable, but it's precisely the communists out there today who don't want it.
Yeah. People want things, they don't want to actually have to pay for them effectively, even if it's like pay for them in behavior or accountability. No one wants to be an adult.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do, but like a lot of people don't want to be an adult, and that's kind of like, I guess, the major issue with like human social organization is that there's always going to be people who want to like be freeloading, regardless of their ability or merit or whatever. Or
right. And my attitude is kind of like, if you don't have money and you're not productive, that's okay. You just have to be a good person, right? Like, surely that's a reasonable request, right? And this is where I'm like, I sound like a tradcath, or this is my more like kind of tradcath temperament here. It's like, I think if you don't have money, or your IQ is not high and you're not capable, or you just have personality traits where like you're not ever going to make that much money. You just can't. That's fine. I still want to love you. I still want to support you. I still think you should have a dignified life. I think I am obligated as a human in this species to work with you, to share what I can, and other people to share what they can, to make sure that you have a dignified, stable, happy, healthy, harmonious life. What I'm saying is, all the community can reasonably expect from you, since you can't make money, and that's fair. You shouldn't be blamed for that. That's fine. That's not your fault. But you can be expected to have some basic baseline character obligations, and you can be held to that, and that's right, and that's fair, because character is not like money. It's like, you can committing to just not tell lies, for instance. Everyone can commit to not tell lies. It's possible. It is possible for everyone to figure out a way to not tell lies if they're being cared for by a community, right? So I feel like we should be more austere and demanding on each other in terms of ethics and character. And in return, we therefore will be more generous and redistributive and communistic in terms of economic resources. That's pretty much my kind of, that's my based leftism, or my kind of conservative leftism, or tradcath leftism,
It's not like
catastrophic politics.
ground up social credit score, the grassroots social credit.
Yes, yes, I that's what I'm into. I'm into that.
I support that. I generally support.
So tell me real quick, what's your story, and what's this podcast all about, or like what's your um give me some background on what we're doing here and
Yeah.
yeah.
Basically, I grew up cosmopolitan. My dad's a modern artist, and then my stepfather was a Southern evangelical minister. So I also was like philosophy and I like art and whatever. So I always was drawn towards these types of thought. But then I realized it's actually very rare for someone to have a very deeply entrenched experience of both New York City cosmopolitan artists and also deep Southern evangelical.
And are you in New York now, or what?
I'm in New York again now. Yeah.
Okay.
So
You mind if I ask what you do for a living?
Well, a hodgepodge of like technical writing, freelance, and then also like crypto trading, and then kind of whatever kind of. Well, I studied math in undergrad, so I kind of just leverage that
Cool.
my ability to write with my math and technology understanding.
And so, like, are you a reactionary, or how reactionary are you, or what are your politics?
I am fairly reactionary. I'm learning. I'm learning that I've always had a fairly reactionary bent. I just happen to also be cosmopolitan enough in that I don't, because I'm from New York City, so I just don't. Different cultures, different people. I don't even notice, but
Okay.
I do have always noticed behavior, and I always hung out with leftists, but I never fit in. They always kind of just let it slide. I would say the
Yeah,
wrong things constantly.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I always said the wrong things, but I've read the right books, so it always kind of like they were like, oh, it's fine. And I'm realizing now I'm a little more reactionary than I actually thought I was.
Okay.
Uh,
Cool.
yeah, so I kind of just try this podcast is me trying to I guess like have my synthesis of some of the more right wing thinking, like, and like also the interesting like left wing thinkers who aren't like just following the boring
Right.
socially acceptable narrative.
Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah. And I was gonna do because I started in crypto Twitter. I kind of originally was thinking people who are around crypto Twitter, but it kind of just is turning into what it's turning into.
Right on.
Yeah.
Nice. How long have you been doing? How many episodes you have?
This is episode 5.
Okay, so
Yeah,
fresh. Nice.
it's fairly fresh. Yeah, and I'm trying to pick up the pace soon because I'm talking to a few other people. If I say the names, then I'm sure that they won't actually come on. But there are some fairly large for this weird corner of Twitter
Yeah.
people who are I'm trying to schedule it now.
Cool. Nice.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of any. So you said you're working on your current book, but you haven't like talked much about it yet, or you're not doing any press on it yet.
Yeah, not yet. I'm gonna sit on that for a little bit because I always have a bunch of things kind of on the back burner, and I always have to just kind of decide what order I want to do things in. I think the bigger book, I think I might do I want to do a few other shorter things. Because what I really need to do is get to like legit financial stability first, and then I can have the luxury of some longer term planning. So yeah, the big theory book probably won't come out for a little bit, but yeah, definitely sooner than later. Definitely in the next few years.
Are you doing any more of those lecture series on YouTube? I get a lot of notifications for those.
Yeah, I'm doing all kinds of stuff, experimenting with different things. The thing I'm doing at the moment is launching a legit online course with like a live seminar series.
Nice.
So yeah, actually just yesterday it went live, Deleuze versus Heidegger on technology, enslavement, and escape. And I'm doing that with my colleague, Johannes Niederhauser, who's really, really good Heidegger scholar. He's a very based man himself and very articulate, very good lecturer. So I was like, hey, we should, I want to start doing like serious online courses. So let's do one together. And so that just opened up yesterday, in fact. So it's like 6 hours of lecture videos. And then we are doing 3 live sessions over the next few weeks. So people who sign up for the course, like right now, will be in these live seminar discussion groups also. We'll have 3 of them. So yeah, we have about 20 people signed up.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I'm very happy with the results. And it's a fairly premium product, so we priced it accordingly. And so it's actually, to be honest, it's a bit of a game changer for me in what I'm doing and what I'll be doing moving forward. It's a real validation that there are a lot of people who want independent philosophy classes, and we'll pay good money for it. So it's very exciting in many ways. And so that's what I'm doing at the moment. Yeah.
Awesome. And so you have that, and then also your podcast, the Other Life podcast.
Yep.
So for the audience, make sure to check it out. Also, definitely check out the book Based Deleuze, which we've talked about actually fairly at length, about as long as the book takes to read, which is also a fun
Yeah.
little bit on that.
And the paperback will be out very shortly.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah, the paperback will be up on Amazon, like maybe this week. If I'm lucky, it'll be out Friday. If not, then very soon in next week. It's all done. It's all ready. I'm just basically
waiting for the review process.
I have to clean up a few things about it, but it's pretty much all ready to roll. I'm very happy with it too. It looks good.
That's awesome. Yeah. Anything else you want to promote?
Not anything except if you have some people in your audience who are in LA. I'm doing an event in LA on February 28th. There's going to be the first ever live show for the podcast.
Nice.
We booked a sweet venue. We're going to do a live podcast show. And then there'll be a party also. So we think there might even be we might get some musical acts. We're trying to get like a SoundCloud rapper just because it'd be funny. So there's going to be a special guest I'll do the podcast with, like up on the stage. And then after that, there'll probably be some kind of performance or something like that, just to be weird and cool about it. And then there'll be beers and pizza and stuff like that. So it'll be a party pretty much. It'll be a live podcast show and then a party. That'll be on February 28th. And then after that weekend, I literally rented a massive house for people to stay in who wanted to hang out. And that's been a pretty wild experiment, but it's basically worked out. It's already booked up, so I don't even have anything to pitch people on. So that's a done deal, but it's going to be dope. I literally rented a mansion, and it's already, and on the Saturday, so we'll be staying there for 2 nights. It's about like 15 people signed up to do this with me, and on the Saturday during the day, so that'll be like February 29th. We're going to do a little mini conference.
Oh, it is a leap year. Yeah.
Yeah, people will give talks and stuff like that, and it'll probably be live streamed. And so yeah, on the weekend of February 28th, my Twitter and YouTube and stuff should be pretty wild. Should be interesting stuff coming out.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on.
Anyone out there listening to this is in LA, and if this airs before February 28th.
Oh, it'll be up like within the next 24 hours. I'll make sure to link it if you send me the info.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tashim, man. It was cool. Fun talking with you. I appreciate it. And yeah, I think we chatted before. I'm gonna do something with you on mine. I'll
Awesome.
reach out to you about that.
Awesome.
I want to learn more about your Bitcoin book.
Awesome. Yeah. I'll link that in the description too if you guys are checking it out. Thanks.
Right on, man. Cool, dude. Thanks.